Batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast, episode 11 today. I'm Jeremy and I'm here with my partner Jeff. Jeff, how are things in the Rocky Mountains this morning?
Things are cold.
Cold here too.
I think there's a little bit of an inversion is what they call it, where it's warmer in the mountains a little bit.
So it's all the cold is down where you guys are, down where the people are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cold here. It's 10 degrees right now here where I am. So
that's pretty cold.
Chilly here. I'm excited about today's session because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite bands, and this album in particular is one of my favorite albums. So I'm excited that we'll be talking about that. The album in question today is from 1974. It's UFO's Phenomenon album, which introduces a young guitar player named Michael Schenker. It wasn't his first album. He was on the Scorpions album Lonesome Crow, but this was really where he kind of got his traction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what we'll talk about today. I had one little related news item, Jeff. I think we could call it news. There's a new Michael Schenker album out. Came out actually a couple weeks ago. It's called Immortal, and this is the first Michael Schenker group album since I think 2008. So this is the first album that he's called the Michael Schenker group since 2008. And I actually have a review of it on the YouTube channel, so you can check out the YouTube channel. But let me just say this, it's a great album.
You like it?
Album. Yeah. So I would highly recommend that you check it out. So I did have a question for you, Jeff. Any thoughts? We talked about the Mountain album last time you were on. Any thoughts on Leslie West and Mountain since we've had that last little review?
Not particularly, although I can hear some of Leslie West's influence in Michael Schenker.
For sure. Yeah, totally. And that's exactly what I was fishing for.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. I thought about that. Yeah. When I was listening.
Okay. I am excited, Jeff, to share an email. We got an email here. And you can email us. Please do email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. So I wanted to just share this email. This is from Michael. I'll just share his first name. Michael says, hi, thanks for the podcast. Discovered it a few days ago whilst hunting for things similar to my favorite, The Album Club. The Album Club is another podcast, and I checked that out. I kind of like that. He says a couple of things to share. One, I enjoyed very much the classic rock family tree. My family and I play what we call the Spotify game, where we have to get from one artist to another using only the fans also like list of bands. For example, if you were trying to get from Sabbath to Guns N' Roses, you would first have to listen to a Sabbath song, then choose one of the bands out of their fans also like list, listen to a song by that band, then choose a band from their fans also like list. So kind of the same degrees of separation thing going on. He says, 2, on your No Country for Old Men episode, you can really use a similar strategy to find new acts that you like. Remember, that was the episode where we talked about newer bands that old curmudgeon-y classic rock fans like me or you. You're not as curmudgeon-y as me. Sorry, I don't mean to lump you in there. But you know what we're talking about is new stuff that someone like us might like. Artists like Ty Segall, Michael Cronin, Jeremy Porter, Buffalo Killers, Stone Foxes, Dan Auerbach, the Bonnevilles, Mark Lanigan solo stuff, though, of course, QOTSA are just a hard rock band, or Queens of the Stone Age. That's what he means by that. And you like Gary Clark Jr., which rolls you into Samantha Fish, et cetera, et cetera.
Gary Clark was on my list.
Then, of course, there's the Hold Steady, the Menzingers, and the like, all of which are really marketing themselves as classic rock bands and doing a pretty good job. Hold Steady shows, are there still shows? ? Are like Rock and Roll Church, and they have a heap of concert performances up in their Bandcamp page. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. So, first of all, he drops a couple names, good names of bands that we can check out, that if you're a classic rock fan, you might want to like. But we want to thank Michael for sending the email, and, of course, encourage the rest of you to do the same, classicguitarrock@mail.com. And the latest thing I wanted to share, we are now also on Google Podcasts. So we are on pretty much all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeart, Stitcher, all the major platforms. You can check us out. So please do listen. Please leave a review also. Those things all help. So if you could go out and leave a review, that would be great. We're excited for today's episode. And when we come back, Jeff, we're going to get into this album, Phenomenon by UFO.
Indeed.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
Welcome back to the Classic Rock Podcast, episode 11. Jeff and Jeremy here with you, and today we're talking about the classic album from the group UFO. It's from 1974, Phenomenon. So, Jeff, you said you had a comment you wanted to make.
Oh, I just was having a really fun time searching and typing in UFO Phenomenon.
Yeah.
And not getting anything to do with the band.
You just get UFO stories.
And I thought, of course, like, what's a perfect name to just like trip up the
so
search
the question
engines.
is, how much time did you waste reading about unidentified flying objects instead of the band?
You know, I was trying to really dedicate my time. So I was staying very focused. I had a lot of coffee. This album is phenomenal.
It's a good album.
I think
it's a good album.
Fantastic.
Let's do just a little a backstory about UFO. And I don't know how far back. I'm more of a UFO geek than Jeff is. I mean, UFO, the band.
Right.
And actually the band name UFO has nothing to do with unidentified flying objects. It's actually named after a club in England called the UFO Club. However, well, like the album cover of Phenomenon has a picture of a UFO on it, right? And then the first two albums of UFO. So it's funny. On the one hand, they say, well, yeah, the name has nothing to do with UFOs. And yet they talk, they call their first album 1 Hour Space Rock, so they kind of play on this unidentified flying object theme, but the actual name came from the UFO Club. So we have this band UFO started in like 1969. Phil Mogg was there. Pete Way was there. Andy Parker was there. It was the core, vocalist and rhythm section was there, but they had a guy named
Mick Bolton.
Yeah. Mick Bolton, Michael Bolton's brother. No, I don't know. There's no relation to Michael, but Mick Bolton, and who was later replaced by Bernie Marsden, who you may know from Whitesnake fame. He was only in there a short time. But if you go and listen to those first two albums, I think the first one's called Flying. Maybe the first one's Flying and the second one is 1 Hour Space Rock. I can't remember, but they're very trippy, psychedelic. I'll just be honest. It's hard for me to get through them, to be honest. Some people love those first two albums, but to compare that to the post Schenker UFO, there's really no comparison. And I don't mean to be too blunt, but to me, UFO didn't really start until Schenker was in there. I mean, that's just my opinion. Okay. So we got Michael Schenker. He's on the first Scorpions album with his brother Rudolph. Yeah. Lonesome Crow. That's an interesting album to go back and listen to. Again, it's kind of psychedelic. It's from like 73. There's a great video on YouTube called I Think I'm Going Mad, where they're all running. It reminds me of Planet of the Apes. They're like running across the cliffs and mountains, and they're got their bell-bottom pants on, and it's very psychedelic. But there's
like in Germany somewhere.
Yeah, totally. Yes. They're in Germany. They're in the Black Forest somewhere. Or whatever. But Michael was 15 years old or 16 on that album. And
I really want to go back and find out, how he started.
Yeah.
Like, where did he get his influence, and how did he get his chops? That's almost like he just was born to what he did.
And that's just it. And I'm interested you said that, because that's a point I want to make as we get into some of these songs. I think back to when I was 15 years old and just starting to play. I mean, I'd played for a couple years, but even when I was 18 years old, the age Michael Schenker is on this album today, well, there's a reason he's considered a legend and I'm not, right? But it's very impressive that a guy this young plays with so much taste and articulation and clean playing, and it's
melodic.
It's a phenomenon, Jeff.
And songwriting, right?
Yeah, and songwriting. And here's the deal:
to write hooks, like he
very catchy. And he didn't speak English. Okay, he did not speak English when he joined UFO. I think at various times he might have a girlfriend that could translate, but at the very beginning, at least the first album, I mean, he spoke very little English. And can you imagine what that would be like? The collaborative process of trying to write a song with you don't even speak the language. And so I've read in other interviews that it was a lot of just jamming. They'd come together and jam, and he'd play a part, and I guess he could tell based on how the guy was singing, is this a sad song? Is this what? I don't know. I just
speak the language of rock.
The language of rock. That's right.
It's actually one of my things I talk about when I'm talking about music with people. I say it's universal. This is the most amazing thing about music, right? You can connect.
Yeah.
And things like the octave, people can relate to around the world. It doesn't matter. Everybody can hear that. And it's like, oh, that was an octave.
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
That's a great point. I'm just trying to think, if you and I were playing together, we'd say, oh yeah, this is in D, go to the D here or whatever. If a guy doesn't speak English, and he probably very quickly picked those basics up, D, the names of the chords or whatever. But even that basic stuff you take for granted, that would be an interesting thing. Here's an 18-year-old kid, been in Germany. I don't know if his first time in England, if this was his first time in England, I don't know. But all of a sudden he's now in a band. These guys are, most of them, quite a few years older than him.
Were they opening for the Scorpions, right?
Scorpions were opening for UFO. So Scorpions were opening for UFO. Bernie Marsden had come in kind of temporarily to replace Mick Bolton. And they offered Michael a gig. I mean, they're in the middle of this tour of Germany, and they offer Michael this gig. Hey, would you like to come in and be our guitar player? And Rudolph, and I didn't realize this, Rudolph is like 7 years older than Michael. So he's a lot older than Michael. And here's Michael, who's like 15 by now he's 18. And Rudolph encouraged him to do it. Yeah, you should do it. You should do it, because UFO was bigger than the Scorpions at the time. So he joins. And this album, released in May of 1974, their first album. And it's pretty cool. Now, before we get into the tracks, and I don't know if we've talked about this, Jeff, but I remember a long time ago hearing this story that at one point when Mick Taylor was leaving the Stones, this is 75, 76, they were pursuing Michael Schenker as a replacement. Okay. Now, when I first heard this story, I'm a Schenker fan, right? I'm listening to Assault Attack. I'm listening to the Michael Schenker group and all this borderline heavy metal, hard rock. Michael Schenker's wearing his bomber jacket and got his spiky blonde hair. That's what I'm thinking. And so when I hear Schenker and the Stones, what were they thinking? That would never work. That's stupid. But when I hear this album, okay, don't laugh when I say this, and you think of the context, right? Don't think about 1980, right? Don't think about the Scorpions. Don't think about even later UFO. But when you hear this album from 1974, I could totally see why the Stones would want him. And here's a little exercise. There are at least 3 songs on this album, maybe 4. I could totally hear Mick Jagger singing. You just change Phil's voice to Mick Jagger and it would totally work. And so in that context, I see why the Stones were interested in this 18-year-old kid, Michael Schenker, to come in and replace Mick Taylor. But that's crazy, because when I first heard that story, I thought, Schenker and the Stones, that would never work.
It's a little bit of a stretch for me at the moment, but I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind when we're talking.
And I'll tell you the songs as we go through. I'll tell you the ones. Now I want you to picture Mick Jagger singing this song, and it would totally work. One other thing. Oh, at one point, Ozzy Osbourne approached Michael Schenker. This is pre-Randy Rhoads. He was originally practicing with Gary Moore. So Gary Moore was kind of starting his solo thing. But originally, my understanding is Ozzy wanted Gary Moore. And think of that. That would have been an interesting band. Gary Moore was actually practicing with Ozzy in LA and, helping him audition other members of the band. But Gary Moore from the beginning says, no, I'm not interested in joining the band, but I'll help you. Right. And so, but that's interesting. So I'm not sure how involved Gary Moore was in actually getting Randy Rhoads, because that was all Dana Strum, who was playing bass with them and was kind of, he had a lot of connections in LA and knew a lot of musicians. He's the one that actually brought him in. But I kind of digress. But I just thought it was interesting that at one point, Ozzy Osbourne was interested in Schenker.
I could see that.
Based on both of their issues that they've had with various substances, Ozzy and Michael Schenker would not have been a good idea. Some of the music might have been cool, but I don't know if that would have worked. And I think Michael even knew that, because as I've read Michael talking about it, he said, I didn't think that would be a good idea. He didn't elaborate why he didn't think it would be a good idea, but I just think that would have been interesting. So,
but apparently Pete Way was kind of a party animal running around stage and wrecking things.
And they all were. There's a story on the Obsession tour. So this is the tour that this is earlier than that. This was when they were opening, probably the Lights Out era. They were opening for Fleetwood Mac, and they were on their bus, and Phil Mogg talks about, what's the words he uses, that they needed some, he didn't use this word, but drugs, right? They were wanting some drugs. And so they hook up with April Wine's tour bus. It's in the area or whatever. And they get a bunch of drugs, and they get to the next show, and they were all so messed up that they could hardly move. And Phil talks about how he could barely move his mouth. Everyone just stood there like statues the whole show. He said it was terrible. And I only bring that up to your point about Pete Way. And it wasn't just Pete Way. I think it was Michael. I think it was Phil. This is maybe the epitome of a otherwise phenomenal band that kind of shot themselves in the foot, because they went overboard And I think that was a lot. We see that with Black Sabbath, right? That the drug use got to be such a problem that it really screwed them up. And I think that was the case with UFO. So kids, don't do drugs. Just say no. Okay.
Just gummy bears.
Yeah, that's right. Gummy bears, fine. Drugs, no.
Unless you're in Colorado, then the gummy bears.
Yeah.
The gummy bears.
Oh,
might not be.
The gummy bears might not be safe. Good point. Okay.
Well, it might be safe, but you might not be able to play your scales.
Exactly. Washington State, where I live, is the same, by the way. So we're the same.
That's right.
Washington and Colorado were the first two states that legalized that.
Yeah.
That's a topic for another show. So any other thoughts before we jump in track by track, Jeff?
I thought it was a bit interesting that this album was produced by what's his name, the bass player from 10 Years After, Leo Lyons. Yeah,
Leo Lyons, bass guitarist of 10 Years After. I did not know that.
I thought it's remarkably, the production is fantastic for the time.
It's very good, especially when you think it's 74. I think it's great. And you might be looking at the same notes I am here, but just another aside. Album cover produced by Hypnosis. Hypnosis, for those of you that aren't aware, Hypnosis is a graphic arts company in England that just they crank out these kind of bizarre album covers, and they've done it for years. They've done album covers for Pink Floyd, for Def Leppard. So a funny story, and it's probably similar here. You know, the album cover looks like it's some retro picture from the 50s or 60s of a lady standing in her front yard. It looks like a 57 or 55 Chevy in the driveway. Then up in the sky, it's like a unidentified flying object. You know, it's just kind of a retro, kind of a funky thing.
Yeah, she's like pasted on there too. It seems like
it's kind of hokey, and notice the UFO logo is that's the same logo they had on the first two albums. And then I think, I don't have it in front of me, I think by Force It, they have the new UFO logo with the little lightning bolt through the middle. I could be wrong. I don't have it in front of me, but this still has the old UFO logo. But one other thing about Hypnosis, just so you kind of know how Hypnosis works, is they would just make these album covers, not for a specific band necessarily. They just make these weird little pictures. And then Def Leppard tells a story of when they saw the album cover for High and Dry, right, which is the guy in the Speedo diving, and then all the guys on the side of the album in black and white, all the bald guys, just weird. It's like, what does this mean? Mm-hmm. So Def Leppard saw this album cover, and they had no idea what it meant. It's just what the album cover bought from Hypnosis. And that could have been, that same cover could have wound up on a Pink Floyd album. It could have wound up on anyone's album, right? That's kind of the way it worked. So same thing. You look at the album covers that Hypnosis made, Force It, No Heavy Petting. They're just bizarre. They have nothing to do with the album. They have nothing to do with any of the songs, but that's just what they did. That's how they rolled in the 70s. You know, they just buy this weird album cover from Hypnosis. So that's interesting.
Indeed.
All right. So are we ready to go track by track, Jeff?
Yeah, let's do it.
The first track is Too Young to Know. And this is one of my favorite songs on the album. It's just a very melodic. It's not flashy. You know, and it's just kind of a mid-tempo.
Yeah, happy tune.
It's a happy tune, a major scale. And this is 74. You know, we're not talking about there's crunch, right? He's playing through Marshalls, but not super, super heavy. Not as heavy sounding as Leslie West to me, you know. But again, this is just a good, upbeat, major scale rocker. One
interesting thing I thought about, I feel like there was some old Journey song that this kind of pulled me into. I don't know what tune I'm thinking of.
Right.
But there was just something about, I think this is the song with, there's a change when it kind of plays the C walking down.
Yeah.
It gives me a Journey kind of thing.
And, you know, Neil Sean's a big major scale guy. So you hear that feel. Yeah, I could see that.
And the bass was awesome in this tune.
Yes, very good bass. Pete Way, kind of an underrated bass player. Everyone talks about him kind of being this wild party man, and he was, but he was a great bass player too. It's a tight arrangement. I think Phil Mogg also is a great vocalist. He's got his own unique style, very much kind of in the school of like a Paul Rodgers to me, kind of a bluesy sounding. He's not a Robert Plant, right? He's not a screamer. He's not an Ian Gillan, but he's just got a great bluesy delivery. I think he's great.
Yeah, I was not aware he was that talented. He's awesome.
Then we've got Crystal Light. This was before Crystal Light, the lemonade mix, right? It was before that. Okay. But Crystal Light, this is one of the songs. Now, when this is over, Jeff, I want you to go back and listen to it. And I want you to think of Mick Jagger singing the song. Okay. This is a mellow song. It's got some acoustic guitar in it. There's a lot of acoustic guitar on this album, actually, and a lot of very melodic, mellow, pretty songs. Okay. There's a lot on this. Okay. So you think of UFO as a hard rock band, and they are, but there's a lot of melodic, kind of lighter stuff. And this is one of those songs.
Felt like maybe not the original, but a beginning of the heavy metal kind of ballad.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That arpeggio intro on the guitar. Yeah, totally. I could totally see that.
Yeah, great vocals, backup vocals.
There's a lot of like oohs, a lot of oohs and ahs going on. There's a lot of vocal stuff going on. And I just want to throw this out for folks that are familiar with the later UFO stuff. This album doesn't have a keyboard player on it. No. So the later albums they bring in, I don't think Paul Raymond was the first one, but Paul Raymond's the guy we always associate with UFO as the keyboard player / rhythm guitarist. And that was always kind of part of their formula. Paul Raymond, Neil Carter, various incarnations of the band always had that second guitar player / keyboard player. But this is before that. So what's interesting as we get to the next song, Doctor, Doctor, all the intro is guitar. It's all just kind of a mellow guitar build up, little arpeggiated figure before the song really kicks in. On the later live versions, that's all done on a keyboard. It's a kind of a piano part, this kind of classical, heavily orchestrated keyboard part till you get into Doctor, Doctor. But interestingly enough, I feel like this album doesn't get the credit that later albums like Lights Out and Obsession got, but their two biggest songs, in my opinion, are on this album. We got Lights Out, we've got Doctor, Doctor, and then later on in the album, we have Rock Bottom. But to me, those are live staples. You go see UFO anytime over the last 50 years since they've been around, they are going to play those two songs at every show. No matter who the guitarist is, those songs get played. And Lights Out. Those three songs will get played. There probably has not been a UFO show since 1974 that has not featured these two songs. The first of which is Doctor, Doctor. So what are your thoughts on Doctor, Doctor?
I have some notes about, it kind of reminded me of the Scorpions ballad. I don't know if it was Still Loving You, maybe.
The beginning part where it's mellow. Part. Yeah.
Kind of a minor thing as in contrast to Too Young to Know. So I really like that. Pulls me in always whenever there's this minor thing that happens. And then I just love the harmony guitar.
It comes in.
And then it's galloping. Like a lot of these songs that are the rockers on this album, especially this one, it's got that gallop that I associate with like Iron Maiden, Steve Harris.
Exactly. Yes. And if you go back and listen to, now I won't go this far because I don't think this is true, but I read, who was it saying? I can't remember. I was reading an interview where they said this song invented the two guitar sound that Judas Priest would use, that Iron Maiden would use. I think it's influential, but Wishbone Ash was doing this before UFO.
Oh.
So 71, 72, they're already doing the twin harmony guitar leads. They weren't as influential. They weren't doing it in as heavy a context as Schenker, but I thought exactly the same thing. When you hear Dr. Doctor, you think Iron Maiden. And
who covers this song?
Who covers this song? Yes. And at the beginning, if you've ever seen Iron Maiden, what do they play before their show? It's UFO. They're playing UFO is what they're always playing before. So UFO has been very influential to Iron Maiden and to Def Leppard. They will both tell you, guys, Pete Way invented the stripy pants.
Yes.
Yeah. So Steve Harris, the guy in Def Leppard, that's completely a Pete Way ripoff. There's a funny interview with Steve Harris where he says, yeah, I saw UFO and I thought Pete's pants were dreadful. Of course, I went out and bought a pair right away, but that's the whole thing is they were super influential. And it's a case of just like Mountain, right? Lots of these bands that they inspired went on to become way more successful than they ever were. But man, UFO really inspired it. That Gallup you talk about, there weren't any other bands playing like that in 75. 74, 75, and it's just a great rock tune. Dr. Doctor is just a great song.
There's that bridge. I guess it's a bridge where the ride cymbal's going. It's a great drum section there.
Oh, and
love that.
And again, you don't get credit. Andy doesn't get credit on drum as you never see his name come up as great drummers. If UFO had been as popular as Deep Purple or Black Sabbath, I think all of these guys' names would be, they'd be mentioned in the same way. They never got that level of success. So,
dare I say, the UFO, the band, flew under the radar?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yes, that's exactly what they did. Oh, Space Child, another mellow song. I was listening to it last night. To be honest, last night's the first time I really paid attention to the lyrics of this song. It's kind of a trippy song. It's cool. There's an awesome live version from Don Kirshner's rock concert, one of those shows of them doing this song live. And the challenge, this, Jeff, playing in a band, slow songs are hard if you only have one guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
They're very hard because the solo comes, everything's moving slower. All you've got is the bass. The guy's not singing. And sometimes it sounds so empty. And yet when I see this live version, I don't notice that it's empty. And I think I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't know. It means that Pete covers it well enough as the bass player. You don't notice the holes, or it's the way Michael's playing, but it works as a slow song, with just drums, guitar, and bass. And Schenker's he's just awesome on this song. And one of the things, again, as I listen to this, and I'll get in trouble when I say this, here's an 18-year-old kid. The way he plays the way he picks is so clean and articulate. You go back and listen to Blackmore, and I love Richie Blackmore. He's, compared to Schenker, way sloppier. Jimmy Page, who's brilliant, is a very sloppy player most of the time, where with Schenker, I don't hear that. He plays very clean, and he's playing. It's hard. If you're not a guitar player, I struggle with this. It's hard to play way up high on the neck for me. And when I hear someone like Schenker, who's way up high and still plays cleanly and very smooth and articulate, that's something I can't do. I can't do it. And here's a kid who's 18 years old, who's playing so clean and articulate, even way up on the neck, without tons of gain. To me, I don't know how he does it.
Have you seen, there's a live version of Dr. Doctor. I can't remember what was in the title. I think it says Michael's First something, but he's got his flying V, and he's hunched over it. He's got the V part in his thigh,
on his leg. That's the way he plays.
Yeah.
And he's just, and he doesn't move. He just stays.
Yeah.
And depending on the video, is it one of those where you never see his face? Because his hair is just hanging in front of his face the whole time?
Yeah, kind of. And he's doing the beginning part. And obviously there's no harmony,
right?
But he pulls it off,
Yeah,
because there's two guitars at least, and then there's the rhythm guitar, and then on the recording, and he's pulling it off live, just double.
Does he just switch between playing one part at one time and the other part at the other? You don't really miss it when you see it live.
I feel like he's actually playing like a 2-note kind of thing, like a double stop,
like a unison,
and he's actually creating a harmony when he's bending that up. So it's just so cool. And he's got these big platform boots on.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. Is he wearing a shirt or is he shirtless?
He's shirtless.
Yeah. He's like a wild man. And then later, so like on Strangers in the Night, where he's got Paul Raymond, they do all the harmony parts with two guitars. They can do all that. But yeah, you're right. Now, interestingly enough, they brought in, after this album, because I think you can find on Spotify, there are BBC recordings where they brought Paul Chapman in as a second guitarist. So even though on this album, Michael's the only one, they did tour with Paul Chapman, who replaced Michael later after Michael left. Paul Chapman came in, who's also a great guitar player. But yeah, so you can hear some recordings where there is a second guitarist and then others where there's not. So it just kind of depends on when and where it all went down. But okay.
You mentioned the lyrics too.
Of Space Child?
Of Space Child, yeah.
Yeah, it's I can't remember them all right now, but I can't tell when I listen, is it really about a space child, someone from space, or is it about, because the opening lines talk about the space in your life, what have you done in that type of thing. And so it almost sounds like there might be a play on that word space child, but then there are other lines that make me think they are talking about, it's just kind of a trippy lyric. Do you have the lyrics in front of you there, Jeff?
Yeah, there's only like two.
There's not much.
Two, kind of verses, so to speak. Yeah, going through pages and looking down lines and lines. Space of your life is only passing you by.
Okay, space of your life. So is that the space they're talking about in Space Child?
Then it's Space Child ages as he turns and faces the lie.
Okay.
Then after laughter was caught in his throat as he died.
Okay, yeah.
Fly on homeward. World spinning by bringing clouds in your eye tonight. The space of your life is only passing you by.
Interesting. So for whatever that means, right?
Yeah. Maybe it's your soul.
It could be. It's but last night as I listened to it, that's the first time I ever really paid attention to it. So cool. Kind of an interesting song. But then that brings us into the closing song of side one. And by the way, I definitely think side one's the stronger side. But anyways, the side one closes out with Rock Bottom, which is another huge song. And just that riff at the beginning, there's a lot of songs that came later that I think borrowed this idea from Rock Bottom. The whole, you're riding on the low E string. Wasted by Def Leppard comes to mind. It's kind of based on that same Mean Streak by Y&T. Again, it's that A string hitting the octave E, mixing it up. But this is, again, 74. Rock Bottom comes out, and it's just a really good tune. This is one that you see live, it'll be 12 minutes long, right? Because he'll have this on the album. Well, even on the album, it's 6 minutes long. But this is one he really opens up on. And there's even newer videos from the last couple of years where he's playing that solo to Rock Bottom. It's just phenomenal. And it's different every time he does it. But this is the song he really opens up on.
Yeah. And that tone, it kind of instantly reminded me of, Money for Nothing, Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits.
Yeah.
So he kind of had his wah pedal on, and he wasn't going back and forth with his wah. It was just, somewhere, in the middle.
Leaves it in the middle.
Kind of acting like a filter to get that nasally kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this riff, when it opens, I wonder if he had that going on.
I bet
he studio anyway.
Totally. But that's totally that's the Schenker sound. The Crybaby's on, but you're not using it. It's just kind of in the middle to get that nasally. Because later on the Schenker albums, that's all over the place. that was the Michael Schenker sound. And he does a lot where he rolls off the volume, where I don't want to say it sounds like the woman tone as much as like Leslie West got that sound. However, on one song on this album, I do kind of hear that, but there's a lot of, roll back the volume. And a lot of great players are able to do this is they use I never use my volume knob or my tone control. I never do.
No,
I don't know. I don't know how. Right. But these guys, he's using, they got as much as this is before there were a bunch of effects.
Well, right? I was going to say, you got a guitar and a cable into a wah, but into the amp. Often you're diming the amp to get that gain. But then when you roll back, you've got your rhythm and you play with your tone to get different kind of texture. That's what they had.
They made it work.
I kind of want to go back to that.
Totally. But again, this is a classic. It's a staple. There's never been a UFO or Michael Schenker show that has not featured Rock Bottom or Dr. Doctor. That's just the reality. That's like going to see Deep Purple and they don't play Smoke on the Water. It's not going to happen. Right. So I
love the ending too.
I'm trying to think, how does it end?
It's got these crashes. Da, 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 da.
Oh yeah.
Da, 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 da. It's really tight.
Yep. And then da, 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 da. And then he slightly changes the chord to, there's a little dissonant chord on one of the stops there too. And then it kind of resolves at the end. Yeah. I love that song. The whole song is it's awesome. Then side two starts with Oh My.
I have some notes that reminded me of a Grand Funk Railroad song.
Totally. Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I can totally see that kind of a groovy sound. And the guitar solo has a, I could totally see a Grand Funk there. It's a good one.
And I think I also it's got that gallop as well.
Time on My Hands is the other one that sounds like a Rolling Stone song to me. Second track on side two, Time on My Hands. It's mellow, has a good guitar solo in it, tasty guitar solo.
Great vocals.
Man. Yeah, it's a good one. And this has acoustic on it too, right? Yeah, there's acoustic guitar on this.
Yep.
So I guess I'm impressed with Michael's versatility for such a young player and just tasty. I still to this day play a lot of crap. Right. I'll play stuff and go, oh, that didn't sound very good. And I'm sure, this is the recorded version. We don't hear all the stuff, all the clams that didn't go on the album, but he just sounds really good just throughout the album. But yeah, great song. The next song, Built for Comfort, is an old Willie Dixon tune, but notice they give Willie Dixon writing credit here. Unlike Led Zeppelin, who wouldn't have. Okay. So they give Willie Dixon credit. And this is an old blues tune. This is the one that there's like two guitars. There's the more prominent guitar, which is playing the riff. But then to the side, this is the one that's kind of got the woman tone feel. The volume's backed off. It's a little bassier sounding, where he's playing some tasty little blues licks beside that main riff that he's playing. And it's a typical blues song, blues beat, blues bass part. But I think they pull it off really well. I think it's a good song.
ZZ Top, I instantly thought of.
It's got a very ZZ Top feel.
And speaking of versatility, right? He's playing obviously more of a blues and slower kind of holding those bends.
Exactly. And I think this is really the only song on the album that I really think this is a blues song, right? It's a straight ahead blues. Queen of the Deep, the last song, kind of got some of that element, but this song is a blues song. Yeah. And it's very good. Now we've got an instrumental here. The track after that is called Lipstick Traces. And I used to always just kind of look at this as kind of filler, but as I've been listening to it more, I don't really feel that way anymore. What are your notes you have on Lipstick Traces?
I had spacey cosmic country rock.
Yeah. I like it.
The melody, I feel like a lot of other bands have been influenced by this kind of minor melodic thing.
And here's what's interesting. I almost expected this to be a cover the first time I heard it, because, and this will really date me, and you mentioned country, right? This sounds to me like two things. It reminds me of Sleepwalk, not so much the slide guitar part, but the accompaniment, the chords behind it sound like Santo and Johnny. I mean, it's just kind of that style. This reminds me of a Floyd Kramer song. You remember Floyd Kramer that played all the country? He played countrified honky tonk versions of on the piano, right? And I hear this and I think of Floyd Kramer. But here's the deal. There are some notes in there, and this is the harmonic minor you're talking about, that when I hear it, I can't see from this time frame. I cannot imagine an American playing this song. The choice of notes to me sound very European and almost medieval in some of the, it's not dark. It's not a dark song at all. It's kind of upbeat, but he plays notes there that are not major scale notes. He throws in some extra little classical notes that I would picture someone on a lute playing or something. I don't know when I hear it. And I'm like, I don't know if he actually has a classical background or if this is just his ear, you know, that he plays these notes. I do remember hearing an interview that Michael Schenker, this is way back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, I'd read my guitar player magazines and they'd always talk about UFO and they'd always talk about Michael Schenker. And I had never even heard any UFO albums as I read these interviews. But I can remember Schenker saying one time that I can't remember who it was. It was probably Phil Mogg, but I can't remember. The criticism he would get is that, man, all your guitar solos sound like nursery rhymes. And what they meant was they're very melodic. And they are. And this Lipstick Traces is a perfect example of, it's a very,
I had down lullaby.
That's a perfect word for it. That's a perfect word. That's what it sounds like. Right. And great. Even on some of his more rocking songs, they have that, you can sing them back. They have that element to them. He's very, very melodic, and he's able to weave from a theory standpoint. You probably know more about this than I do, Jeff, but from a theory standpoint, he's weaving in a couple different scales within these songs and you don't even notice he's doing it.
Yeah.
And it's just a short little, it's only 2 minutes long, 2 minutes and 20 seconds, but it's a beautiful piece. And this is kind of a precursor to later instrumentals like that Bayou Pleasurette song, which comes later in his career. Same type of thing. There's another one on one of the UFO albums, I can't remember, where you get the same concept, only he's adding more layers. He's got 3 or 4 different guitars playing on some of these songs, but it's always the same kind of melodic, often major scale feel. It's just very musical and they're pretty songs, you know, and I really hear that. And then the last tune is Queen of the Deep. What do you think about this one?
Again, another like slow, mellow kind of intro, right?
Exactly.
Spacey. Love the picking. I have big notes on his Phil's voice.
Oh, what do you think about Phil? I haven't been giving Phil enough credit during this conversation, by the way.
It's like, you know, I was just listening to a second there of it to remind myself. His voice is so present. It's like right in front of your face. You know, he's not hiding behind tons of reverb, or I don't really hear a lot of compressions unless it's really subtle. And it's just the way he kind of sings these melodies. It's just, I think he doesn't get enough credit. Awesome.
He's a great singer. And this is one, again, a pretty simple riff when you hear it, once it kicks in, starts out mellow, like you said, kind of mellow and spacey, but then this riff comes in, kind of a single note riff that sounds really good. I think it's this song that is probably my least favorite solo, if I'm remembering correctly. This is one I just talked about how melodic he is and all of this. This is one, and not that it's a bad solo, but this one seems like a very busy solo for the sake of being busy to me. Like maybe he hadn't thought this one out as much. It's fast, not like blazing fast, but fast. And, not as many bends. He doesn't. One of the things that he does great is his vibrato is just awesome. He's got this nice wide vibrato. And I think it's this song where I miss that in the solo because it's a lot of picking, just a lot of notes. And I think it's Queen of the Deep that I'm thinking about there. But that wraps up the album, and it's a good song. I said I preferred side one, and I do. I think side one is the stronger side, but side two, this is like the Mountain album. There's not a bad song on this album. And for me, it's the context that's so important, right? Here's an 18-year-old guy, his first album with this band. And this album is a monumental album in who it influenced and how much influence it had on other people. And a lot of the stuff we consider classic hard rock or classic metal, you can trace right back to here. And sadly, a lot of the folks that are big Iron Maiden fans or Def Leppard fans or whoever, or Guns N' Roses fans, right? They've cited UFO. They even steal, remember that part of Sweet Child of Mine? Where do we go? Where do we go? Where do we go from here? Well, that's taken right off of this album, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So anyways, we all know the bands they influenced, but many folks haven't actually gone back to the source to hear where all of that came from. So it's always good to go back to the source. So sum up the whole album, Jeff, in your words. What makes this a great album?
Wow. A surprise for me and inspirational as a guitar player to go and do some studying and learn some of his stuff and his techniques. Because I really, I back when I was in high school, I think Michael Schenker group was kind of like on our radar a little.
Right.
But UFO is not. I didn't back then think about going back. So I didn't, I don't have a lot of experience, but listening to this, like you said, every song I think is just awesome. And it's enjoyable and it's versatile. There's just like lots of different things in here.
I'm like you I was familiar with Michael Schenker and pretty familiar. I mean, I had the Michael Schenker albums in the early mid 80s. I started getting into Michael Schenker. I'd hear them refer to UFO. I think the local rock station played Lights Out, so I had heard Lights Out, but it's, to be honest, really only been about the last 10 years that I've really gone back and dug into UFO, and they're maybe my favorite band. And this is a great album. It's the start of what I consider UFO. They had the two earlier albums, but this is a great place to start. And like you, versatility is what I think. Here's and we always focus on Michael, and he's phenomenal, but the whole band is really solid, a really solid band. The bass playing's great. The drumming's great. The singing's great. If you're going to start digging into UFO, you might as well start with this album, right? And then this is one of my favorite UFO albums. People always will cite Obsession as their favorite, and Obsession's a great album too, but this might be my favorite UFO album. I go back and forth. It might be different if you ask me next week. But
have you gotten into Strangers in the Night?
Yes. And
the live album?
Here's the thing. That's a whole nother topic.
Considered one of the best live albums.
Yeah, and it's my favorite live album ever. I have the original vinyl LP, but if you listen to it on Spotify, you get twice as much stuff, right? So listen to the digital version because you hear more. But and I'll use Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom as examples. As good as these songs are on the album, I actually prefer them live. UFO is one of those bands that and Cheap Trick is in this category for me. They are better live. Their live albums are better than their studio albums. I just think there are some bands that are there are studio bands, there are live bands.
Okay.
And Strangers in the Night Yeah, that's a phenomenal album. Everyone should own it. It's great.
Yeah. So after getting into Phenomenon, hit Strangers in the Night.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. And then you'll be disappointed after you've heard Strangers in the Night and you go back and listen to the studios, because that's what happened to me. I got Strangers fairly early on and loved it. And then I'd go back and listen to some of these songs on the album. I'm like, oh man, I like the live version better. So anyways.
Yeah.
Well, hey, this has been great, Jeff. I appreciate you picking. I picked this album, right?
You picked this album.
Well, I appreciate you listening to it.
I appreciate you sending it over to me.
It's great. So thanks so much for listening. We'll have another great album next week. I'm not sure which. We'll have to figure that out, Jeff. We'll do another great album next week. Remember, you can email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. We're available on all the major platforms. So please listen, subscribe, put in a review there. And we also have our Patreon page. We still haven't met our goal of $9 a month yet, Jeff. So the invitation's still out there. The first patron on Patreon, we're going to bring on the show. So there's that too. So check us out, Classic Guitar Rock, patreon.com. And also we've got the YouTube channel, Facebook. So it's been great. Thanks so much for listening. Jeff, I'll see you next week, bud.
Yes, see you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.